Hello, this is Keith Patterson. I'm here with my dad and my brother. We are doing an interview with my dad, and we'll introduce him in a second. My name is, again, Keith Patterson, and I'm here with my brother.
Mark. This is Mark. Good morning.
And it is September 4th, 2021. We are in Custer, South Dakota at my dad's house. And we're just going to do a real interview, probably a pretty long format one. And Dad, you can introduce yourself now, I guess. Just probably just saying who you are, when you were born, how old you are, might be a good place to start with that.
Well, I'm Bill Patterson, William Patterson, and I was born November 9th, 1938 in Denver, Colorado. And just to keep this open with all the family and so on, the newly discovered family, when I talk about my mother, I'm talking about my adoptive mother, not my birth mother. If I use the word birth mother, I'll probably say Hazel rather than mother. And when I say mother and father, I will be talking about Mary and Clifford Patterson that adopted me in 1940.
Yeah, thanks for covering that. And just as a moment, we talked a little bit about this before we got started, but just really the purpose of this, and we were mentioning it's, yeah, I was saying it seems a little grim, having these questions at this point, but really we're looking at some legacy. I know that recently, and we'll talk about this as we go down, but talking about how you recently discovered your birth mother and that side of the family, and she had recorded a story or an interview at some point in the past, and it really was nice for us all to be able to kind of at least see her, hear her talk, have her talk about her life a little bit. And this is something you always intend to do, but we finally, Mark really kind of pushed and made sure that this is something that we happen while we're all healthy and happy and able to do this and have some time to do this and create this legacy and be able to tell this story. So everybody was able to ask these questions that maybe they, you don't necessarily always come up for conversation, but that's really the purpose of this today. And just to, just have a recording and an archive of this that we can, share with the whole family and on down the line at some point. That we don't have to worry about that today necessarily. So that's really why we're doing this. And I think the format we're going to try to take, I have some definite sections because I have a feeling this might go fairly long, but I think we're going to cover it fairly chronologically, and I think we're going to probably weave in a little bit. But so really starting with some of your childhood, I personally was you were fairly old, and I don't know a whole lot about your childhood, and so it's getting parts and pieces here, but I'm just going to ask some questions. Probably a good place to start is at the very beginning. Just wondering, what are your earliest memories from your earliest memories from your childhood?
Okay.
Which is kind of hard.
Probably the earliest memories I have is one that kind of stands out was my adoptive mother had polio right after they brought me to the home after they adopted me, took me for adoption, and they it was the fall of 1940, and she came down with polio and she fell on me, and then she wound up in the hospital, and I remember going to the hospital in Minneapolis, and she was in a bed, and she had her bad foot was elevated because they had done a bone fusion on her ankle, and she had her foot up in this thing that looked like a bird cage to protect the foot, and so that was kind of an interesting memory. And then I don't remember much of the early years, but I remember then we moved to Aberdeen, South Dakota after Minneapolis, and I was only about 3 years old at that time, and there was a flood, and the basement of the house got filled with water, and so I went downstairs with a stick and a line, and I was going to catch a fish down there. I guess a fish had got into the basement through the drain.
Oh,
I was going to catch that fish.
Okay.
And then from there, we moved to Princeton, Minnesota, and I kind of just remember growing up there. but I was a little older, so the earliest memories are kind of there.
Yeah, the next question I really had, and it's interesting, talking about how Grandma Mary had your adopted mother or your mother had polio, and it seems to me, I remember being a child because she died when I was fairly young, but I remember that from her. But it didn't seem like much of anything, and I'm sure it was the same with you. But kind of thinking in that grain, what were your parents like? What was your impression of them as growing up and even as an adult? Kind of tell their story a little bit.
Well, I think they're very, very caring, very loving parents, and they cared about me, and they got me involved in things and so on, and my father was a hard worker, and he worked a lot, and so the reaction there was fair, but he was gone quite a little bit, and so that was, the parents were good all the way through, and I was in their later years after they retired, they came back to Wyoming where I lived and spent their life. They wanted to be with us, and you guys, and so they came back to Wyoming, and that's where they died. So yeah, it was a good life. We spent a lot of time. We went to church, and I got involved. My mother was a Cub Scout leader, and then my father got me involved in some sports, and we went to football games because he played football when he was in high school and college, and so we went to a lot of football games, and I played a little bit of football, and so it was a typical childhood.
Yeah, that's good. I always remember, of course I'm just on the tail end of that, but I always remember very much like we do now. We spend pretty much all the holidays and stuff. They either come up to our house or we go to their house, or I remember they would be very, very much involved with us grandchildren. At least that was my memory. Remember Grandma painted. We all have paintings, and probably, we all have her paintings in our house and art. And I remember Grandpa, he spent a lot of time in his garden. That's what I remember of him.
Well, they enjoyed all the grandchildren, and enjoyed the time, and that was one of the reasons I think they came back to Wyoming, was that from Indiana, that's where they'd been for a while, but they didn't want to be there the last years of their life.
Yeah.
And so they're back to kind of watch you guys grow up.
Yeah. I always remember they lived, basically just like 2 blocks from the swimming pool, and so we'd end up at their house a lot of time after swimming all day.
Yeah, they're right there to the swimming pool. You guys. So they go there because Grandma had cookies.
Yeah.
No,
We still have that cookie jar somewhere, I think. That was always full of cookies.
yeah, I remember when they lived in Morrill, when Beth and I were young, and then when did they move to Indiana from Morrill? Do you remember?
It was 1960, late 1960s.
So we moved to Torrington in '66.
Yeah, it was the summer of 1966.
So it would have been just a few years later they moved to Indiana. And then they moved out back to Torrington.
1975.
Okay.
That much I can put a date
So
on.
right after I was born. Yeah, they always lived in Torrington as far as I knew, so, or at least as a child.
Oh, yeah. No, it was the same. So growing up, Morrill was 15 minutes away from Torrington. So same thing. We would be there on the weekend, on Sunday usually, or vice versa.
Or they'd come over to Torrington, but
Yeah.
we were very close together,
Yeah.
and then the corporation closed the store and sent him back east because we had an idiot running the store in Indiana. So, and that's not part of my life, but
But you heard stories, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll
I
talk
just,
about that after the interview.
I just remember their house. Being a child, you see that every room had different colored shag carpet, which was like an amazing, like a Technicolor dream for a child. And it was mostly because she was in a wheelchair. That's why they had to have the carpet everywhere, right? So
The couple that built the house, that was 1970, early 70s. And so the Technicolor Dream House was their thing, and they did. They had all kinds of different color carpet. And
I always mention the one thing: the bathroom with black shag carpet, mirrors around the bathtub, and then the velvet black and white mushroom wallpaper. It's like wow, yeah, 70s. It was amazing.
well, what you didn't see in the front room there where the books were was that wallpaper was flowers, big, ugly flowers, and so on.
Oh, it was blue, right?
I painted over it
Yeah.
when I put the shelf because mother had books. She liked to read, and she
Yeah.
had books and books and books.
Yeah, it was amazing. So yeah, that's some of
So
my memories.
we're digressing.
It's like, we'll be here forever if we tell all those old stories. But that kind of also follow up. I think we talked a little bit about this, but do you have any memories in particular that stand out of their lives?
Of their life?
Yeah.
Well, my mother's perseverance. She was told that when she developed polio in 1940 that she would never walk, and she told the doctors and other people that yes, I will, and she did with the aid of braces, crutches, and walkers, and she essentially walked in the hospital for her last episodes. So she walked all her life, and that was perseverance, and she didn't let anything slow her down much. And I remember the church we went to there in Princeton when I was little, and their typical old church, a half basement and about 7 or 8 or 9 steps up into the sanctuary, and we went everywhere early. Everywhere we went early because she had to get there, and she would put one step on her good leg, she would put on a step, and she'd swing her bag leg up, hang onto the railing, and one step at a time, and into the church, and it never stopped her, and she was active in the Ladies' Society and other things, and steps down to the basement, and steps up to the lodge. The lodge floor, they were active in Eastern Star and Masonic Lodge, and the lodge was on 2nd floor. And eventually they got a little electric chair to ride them up and down, but in the early years it was one step at a time. And then at the end of her life, she church in Clinton, Indiana, where they lived before they came back to Wyoming, they would go early, and there were lots of steps. And that was an old Methodist church with a sanctuary up on the 2nd floor. And up the stairs, and it was a long process because she was then in her late 70s. And one step at a time, and then after church, she would wait till everybody was gone, and when she wore the pantsuit was okay then. Before you had to wear a dress.
Mm-hmm.
And she would wait till everybody was gone, and then she would get on the top step. She would bump down the steps as a 2-year-old would be, because it'd be fun to bumping down the steps on her butt. And I remember that my father was a big sports fan, and listened and watched a lot of football, and I remember we went to a baseball game in Minneapolis. We went to a basketball game, saw George Mikan play basketball, and you don't know what I'm talking about, but whoever was a big star now. He was the big star there in Minneapolis. I remember making that trip, and we go to the high school football games every time they played in town, and he was a kind of a picture and doer, and it was kind of interesting to digress there just a little bit. But when I met my half brother Ken Sir, was that he said, the Sir side is German and Prussian, but he said my parents were my birth mother's parents were Hansens, Hansen, and he said that's Danish, and he said the Danes had the creative ability to do and fix and build, and that shows up in his family. And he said the HANSONs are Norwegian and Swedish. I didn't know that till I met that. And then I went back, I'm on 23andMe, and I went back and checked my 23andMe because it breaks down your ancestral background better. I'm 17% Danish.
Wow.
According to 23andMe.
I think mine had a fair amount of Swedish and
that
Danish.
more, and you got it too, that more Northern European.
Yeah.
It all hooks into Germany. But with discovering my birth mother and finding out that her parents were German, Prussian German, and all down the line, and even to this day, that ethnic, well, Mary's ethnic, they still try to stay German. And so, but the Hansen got in there, and so the gene pool changed a little bit.
Yeah, interesting. Anything else about your father that stood out?
What's that?
About your father? About we were talking a little bit about what you remember from your parents, and you talked a little bit about your dad. But anything else that stands out as a memory about him? I know he was quite the businessman and was all over the place, and we'll probably touch on that a little bit later. But
yeah, we moved a lot, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But the memories of that is, we went to sporting things and so on, and we played catch and did stuff like that in the yard, and we lived in Princeton. We lived on a quarter block. The block was divided up into four different lots, and so the garden of the house was the size of a normal house lot nowadays. And so I had to help in the garden. And then we had a lot of trees in the house, and so in the fall I got to rake leaves, and we had a flour barrel that we put in my wagon, and then we'd rake leaves and throw them in the flour barrel, and then we'd take them out and dump them on the garden for mulch.
Mm-hmm.
And so we worked a little bit, but like I say, he worked a lot. He was very active, very, very work oriented, and successful in what he did. But so that's basic memories, I guess.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, kind of on that note, one of the questions we had. We know that you moved, and you mentioned this a little bit when you were talking about your early childhood, but you moved quite a bit growing up. Yeah, could you just kind of outline where you lived and kind of what ages you were as best you can? Because that was always been interesting to how much you moved, and then trying to put that in context for all of us who never moved at all. I mean, maybe a couple of blocks.
Well, to preface that, I got tired of moving, but
Yeah.
when I was born, I was born in Denver, Colorado, and then of course I was adopted in Beatrice, Nebraska, southeast Nebraska, and then almost immediately, because of the polio and my adoptive mother's sister being a nurse and working in Minneapolis, Minnesota, she knew of the Sister Kinney treatment for polio, which was exercise, surgery, and massaging. And so with her connections in Minneapolis, she got my mother into this program. And it wasn't easy to do, but she got it done because if you knew my Auntie Peg, Margaret Heisey, she was short and full of dynamite, and you didn't mess with her. But she was the nicest woman you want to meet. So she got my mother into this program. So right away, just after I was 2 years old, I wound up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And my father worked for a company called Butler Brothers, which is kind of a supply store to clothing stores, and he worked in J.C. Penney. So he had a little clothing background from J.C. Penney, and he didn't want to stay in that kind of a thing. So he wound up working for Butler Brothers as a roadman. And he had stores in North Dakota, South Dakota, Western Minnesota. And I have his book, his little, where you go to stay and who your connections are and your trips. He had a store in Custer.
Wow.
And a hotel he stayed here in Custer. And I think what his job was maybe to sell, because what Brothers did was they would buy in bulk and then resell to these smaller stores that maybe didn't have the credit line or couldn't get a certain line, and so they would sell, and that was where they made their money, was a little bit of markup. But digressing, that created some of the moves. And so we moved from Beatrice to Minneapolis. We were there until my mother got cured off of morphine. She was on morphine so bad that they had to remove her from morphine or she'd have been an addict. And then when that all got kind of stabilized and the surgery worked and she got released from the hospital there in Minneapolis, then we moved to Aberdeen, South Dakota.
So how old were you about?
How old was I then? I had to have been about 3.
Okay.
3 or 4 maybe. And then from there, my father developed a lot of contacts and moving around and working with these other salespeople. So he had these contacts for the rest of his life. And he heard about this store in Princeton, Minnesota, run by a widow, a pretty well-to-do widow. And so we moved. And I remember living in a house there. When we first moved, I remember living in a house down by the railroad tracks. And it was an old house, and it was a coal burning stove, and my room was on the 2nd floor, and it's cold. And they never cleaned the chimney. It was a rental house, and up above where I came upstairs, there was a plate-looking thing over the chimney. Every once in a while, the chimney catch on fire.
Oh boy.
And so my father would come up with a bucket of water and pour it down the chimney. And that was the big excitement for the night, But we stayed there through the winter, and it was cold. And of course, in Minnesota, it was cold. And then we found this house, and we paid the princely price of $5,000 for that quarter lot, with a house and a 3-car garage. And so we lived there, and I grew up. I was from probably 5 to 12. We lived in Princeton. And the deal was that if my father got the store successful, and he did, and it was a big store, and if he got the store successful, he could work his way into owning the store. He wanted a store, always did. And so we got to that point, and we went up. Adele Nelson was her name, and we went. She went on the 2nd store, but she had a lift. So when we went to see Auntie Dell, my mother could ride up on the thing, and then I got to ride on it, and that was a big deal. And it was quite a flight of stairs. Anyway, it was 1952, maybe 53. No, it wasn't that late. It was about 1950. And so my father went to her and said, okay, he got nice bonuses at the end of the year. He was making $5,000 a year.
Buy a house every year.
In 1948.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he went to her and said, okay, it's time. And she said, time out. And she said, I don't want to sell a store. And he said, now, my father was Scotch-Irish. And I won't say what he said, but he said, okay, I'm gone. And so we moved to Silverton, Oregon, just outside of Salem, Oregon, and went to work and he worked for a lot of Masonic relation. Del Nelson was an Eastern Star. Her husband was a Mason. And so some of these connections were Masonic, and you guys know that, you're Masonic.
Mm-hmm.
But we went So we went there and with another deal, and we were there just about a year. And he got the store going, he said, if you get the store going, we'll let you buy in. And so we got to this store and they went to it and time out, I don't want to sell now. The store is going well. And the guy had the money, and so my father started a dry cleaning store. And bought all the equipment and everything and hired a guy that was helping himself to the cash register, which didn't help at all, but he got canned. And so at that point, my father became allergic to the chemicals in the cleaning. Got sick, so we had to get the heck out of there. So back to Staples, Minnesota.
So you're about 13 now?
I was, 12, 13 years old. And I was a freshman in high school. I went to 3 high schools.
Right.
And so that was Staples, Minnesota. And I never liked Staples, but and we'll talk about that, maybe about Scouts, but I was in Scouts then. And we met in the old depot above, and that was when they had coal-fired stoves, trains. And the trains would sit in there. That was a division point on the railroad, Northern Pacific. And the trains would sit there all night long and puff. And that meeting room was filthy, black, dirty. But that, I'm digressing. So we lived there, and it was another deal. If you bring the store up and get it going and make me some money, I'll let you in. I'm glad that didn't work, but it didn't work. So we wound up in Long Prairie, Minnesota, and I was a year older, 14, 15, sophomore in high school, freshman, sophomore. We always moved on school years. And so I lived there and did a lot of scouting. I liked that town. The school did not have, there was no grade levels. I mean, we all were in grades. But as far as socially was concerned, the seniors and the freshmen and the juniors, and they all ran together. I ran with it. I was good friends with a whole bunch of seniors and juniors and freshmen, and we get together Friday night or Saturday night and listen to records or have little dances and little things. And it was really nice. It was a good school, and but again, we got about a year into this thing and. Nope, don't want to sell. So we moved to Madison, South Dakota, and that's where I spent my junior and senior year in high school. And then I was 19 years old, and 18 and 19 years old. And that's when I graduated from high school.
So when you said that about hanging out with your friends, when was the alligator story? Or did I dream that up? One of your friends had
that was Ronnie Weinhold, and he was older, but he was considerably older, probably in his 20s. But then that's a big difference. But he, we had this group we ran, and we would go up to Browerville, Minnesota. Now all these towns I lived in were 5,000 people or less. They weren't big towns at all, and so we go up to this little restaurant in Browerville, Minnesota, and have a hamburger and a malt. They made malts, and you probably never seen them, but a metal tin on the bottom and a paper cup to fit the tin. And so we go up there, and we were terrible. But one night we took rubber bands up there and tied all the metal tins. There were 8 or 10 of us. We tied all the tins together with rubber bands, and the waitress came to get the first tin and pulled, and the whole table moved.
It's going to sound like an atomic bomb went off.
And so that was one time, and then the next time, Ronnie Weinhold, the friend, he was older, he had a car, and so he kind of fit into our group. He graduated from Long Prairie, and so we went up there one night, and he'd got a alligator or a crocodile, probably a crocodile, but a little baby crocodile. And so we took this darn thing up to Browerville, and and they brought us the hamburgers, and we took the hamburger out of the hamburger and put this baby crocodile in the hamburger. Hey, this hamburger's not done. And the waitress came and got it and saw what it was, and she didn't say a word, and she took it back to the cook and just scream and pots and pans. And we were invited to leave. So that's, I was a pretty good kid, but I lived on the dark side a little bit. And then after that we went to Madison, and after that I was out of high school and we had just graduated, and I'd met your mother, and then we moved to Garrison, North Dakota. And I was there for a year and a half, working the bakery, and I decided to become a baker. I went to Minneapolis to go to baking school, and then when I got done with that, I came to Grand Forks. Candy Peg found me a job. I lived with her for a while, and then got married, and we found a job in Rapid City, and things slowed down. Lived in Rapid for 6 years, and then to Torrington, Wyoming for almost 46 years, and then here.
It's your happy retirement chalet. I think that covered a lot of ground there. Just kind of backtrack a little bit. I know you talked a little bit about how you really enjoy being in Boy Scouts, and I think all your kids, including myself, we all went through Boy Scouts, and I think I'm the only one who became an Eagle Scout. But what other, I guess you mentioned you played some football, but what other activities did you really enjoy as you were growing up?
Well, I was in active in church youth, Methodist youth or whatever they called it, MYF, Methodist, yeah, that was it. And got involved in that. So we moved so often, it was awfully hard to make friends. So this was a vehicle to make friends, and I played a little sports, but I grew so fast, as you guys did, that I was a bull in a china closet. So I wasn't really coordinated enough to play a lot of sports. I moved enough that I couldn't get in a program, and so that didn't work. And I was in band, and that was always good. I sang. I did a little bit of speech. Let's see, Scouts. In Scouts, I was a Cub Scout. I was a Boy Scout. I was an Explorer Scout. I got to Life. I didn't get to Eagle. I got some of the honors. I got the God and Countries. I think they call it something else now, but so I did that. That I guess to my best memory, that's what it is.
Well, and maybe you're going to do this, but talk about, so there's a photograph of you with a group of scouts, and you've got your paddle.
Oh yeah, Well, when we were in Long Prairie, and that was maybe why I wasn't an Eagle, because the focus wasn't necessarily on Eagle. When you were a Scoutmaster, your focus was a lot on Eagle. But we went up, we took the canoe trails out of Ely, Minnesota. And that picture's floating around, and it will be there. And our troop had gone a couple of years. It's not that far to Ely, Minnesota from Long Prairie, maybe 200 miles. And so our troop went quite often. And finally, we got the money. 1955 was when we went up. And so we went on the canoe trails, and since we had been on the trails before, not me, but the troop, it's the same chain of, you go into Canada and you go on the boundary waters, mm-hmm. and it's all connected, water everywhere. And so we went up, and they said, well, we're going to go, we don't want to go on the same route, because they had a route for everybody. And so we got about so far, and we portaged over into an old route. It was about a 2-mile portage. And I remember I wasn't carrying a canoe, but the guy in front of me was, and we went by a bush, and there's a little hole in the bush, and he stepped in that hole, and the hornets came out of that hole.
Ooh.
And fortunately, nobody got stung. But when we got on the other side, we didn't see another human being. All there were moose and deer and mosquitoes. When the sun set, you got in your bed, and of course we had the can of DDT that we sprayed in the, I don't know how we're still alive, but anyhow, we sprayed the whole tent. We had a wall tent. And the leader was from Texas, had a red beard, and he was probably 25. We thought he was an old man, but he would go down to the lake to clean up in the morning. Of course, he didn't wear a swimming suit. They were all by ourselves, and he'd go down there naked, and he would bathe, and he'd sing the Whip and Poop song every morning. And so.
Okay, hold on.
I know. Are you
You're going to mention the Whip and Poop song.
song for us?
No. Poor little lambs have been gone astray, ba, ba, ba. We'll look it up on the internet.
We'll have to cut in a recording of this. Okay.
Hopefully there's animation.
We won't go into that, but
Of a naked red man singing. Okay, I can do something.
it was in the
We'll post
fall. It was in the late summer, and so one of the last days out, he turned we had fiberglass canoes. He turned the canoe over, and we had some flour, and he made pie crust, and we picked some wild berries, and we made in the reflector ovens. We had pie. We had berry pie, and we'd been out there eating sausage, summer sausage, and bread, and dried food, and Kiski rations, and that was heaven. What we did before we left, we took all the bread, you took a loaf of bread and you squished it, and put it so it fit in the backpack. And we had the bread. We were a bunch of greenhorns at canoeing, so we were the last ones to the first stop. And up there in the boundary waters, you could look in 30 foot of water and thought you were in about 3 foot of water. And so when we got to the island we were staying on, we came in and there was a shelf. You could bring the canoe in on the shelf, and then there's a little higher spot, and that's all underwater. And the guy in front misjudged, and he missed the step. And it was about 15 foot straight down. He grabbed the gunnel of the canoe as he went down, flipped the canoe. And so we all come up, and it wasn't, are you hurt? Are you okay? Throw the bread out.
Quick.
Right.
Because we had the old canvas canoe backpacks.
Yeah.
So that's enough. And then when he came all back, they had a sauna, a real honest to God sauna with the bricks and then after you're done, we ran screaming into the cold lake, and it wasn't cold.
And you were Order of the Arrow too, right?
What's that?
Order of the Arrow?
I was tapped out I worked the summer at Camp Paul Bunyan outside of Brainerd, Minnesota. I was a counselor in training. And what that did was they got free help, and I got to go to camp all summer. And I worked the rifle range. And so the last campfire, the end of camp, they had a campfire. And this guy, what was his name? I can't remember. He was going to the University of Minnesota. And he kind of heavy, big, he's bohemian. And nice guy. But you've been tapped out. You haven't been tapped out. But they go around the campfire. He was in Indian costume. He had the feather and he looked in the war paint and the whole thing. They'd walk around and they'd beat the drum. And I don't think they did that for you. I was there.
They did that. Yeah.
Did they?
Mm-hmm.
And so they walked around, and they tapped out about 4 or 5 guys. And I was the last guy, and at that time I was about 5'9", and I probably weighed 100 pounds, soaking wet. And he came around, and he walked around, and he tapped me out. It was 3 times on the shoulder, and he could have driven me into the ground. And then we went back in the fall for the ordeal, and I don't think you went back for an ordeal.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you go a whole day and you don't talk, and your lunch is cheese sandwich.
Yeah. I think we got a slice of cheese and a hard boiled egg. I think that's what we ended
Yeah,
up with.
and you're nothing, and they make you do stuff and so on. And we went out that night, the first night out, they take you out with your sleeping bag and they say, here,
Yep.
that's where you sleep. I woke up in the morning, I was in the middle of a patch of poison ivy,
Well, that was
and I didn't get it,
It's pretty nice of them.
because it was dark when they took us out.
Yeah, that was basically the same thing. I think when I got tapped out, I think you actually came out and were there when they tapped me out, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I came up I knew you were being tapped out, so I came up and what are you doing here? I said, I just want to see camp up here.
I just want to see, because I think we're down in Colorado at Bend de la Torre.
No, you were at
Was that Laramie?
Laramie Peak.
I don't know.
You were
My memory is not as good as your memory. In a lot of
Because
ways.
then I went up, then afterward, all the OA guys went up and had snacks
Yeah, but they're cabin.
up in the mess hall, and I said, well, give me a call, and I'll come to a meeting. And that was in 1970 what? 80 what? That you got tapped out. I still haven't heard from them, so.
It's like I'm trying to think. I had to have been probably like 14 or 15. So it would
Yeah,
have been
about that.
About 1987.
Well, you were well on your way to Eagle.
Yeah.
At that
It was a
point.
little later. I don't remember. Yeah, maybe. I was in high school.
Yeah, that was quite an experience, and yeah, we did the canoe trails, and then that was working Camp Paul Bunyan, and that was quite an experience.
And so to back up, just for clarity, so you graduated in 1957.
Yeah,
Okay.
Madison High School. And it took 25 years to figure this out, but we had 57 graduates in 1957. One for each year, I guess.
Cover letter grounds. Yeah, it's just I hadn't heard all those stories. I really enjoyed the alligator. I'd never heard that alligator story before. I just don't know that you can just go get an alligator. I guess you can. It's like I kind of want to. So kind of backtracking, not really backtracking, but talking a little bit more about you as a student. Some questions about, did you like school? Were you a good student? Or did you have any subject that you particularly liked in school?
Girls.
Like class?
No, I like the arts. I like speech and music and so on, probably better than I should have. And I was interested in the sciences, but that never affected my later life. But I think that's it for my favorite subjects. I moved so much that moved from Minnesota to South Dakota, and the requirements for graduation in South Dakota were way below the requirements for graduation in Minnesota. I could have graduated when I walked into Madison as a senior. I had enough credits to graduate then. Well, why work at it?
Oh.
So, So, and I knew it. See, the problem was they told me. So I knew it. So, I graduated. I did my studies and I did what I had to do. I did what I had to do. And you don't show that to your children.
Well, it's important. I think it's important to know that. Because I know Teresa, my wife Teresa, was in the same boat somewhat. But she, of course, being, a very good student and already knowing what she wanted to do with her life when she was a freshman in high school, she was already like taking college prep stuff. So
Yeah.
a lot of people don't. A lot of people will just take
And
the
that wasn't available
yeah.
to us. What I did as a senior year, your children do as freshmen, or maybe sooner, for
Yeah.
school studies. That's the big change. But that's what it was.
Yeah, I was not in the same boat as a senior in high school. I was still trying to get my math all passed and ready to go, and it was touch and go for me. I think Mary was kind of in that boat because I know that she had a senior year kind of like that too, where she was out carousing and having fun with her friends a lot. Because she was a senior when I was a freshman, so I got a witness at her not necessarily applying herself to her fullest extent when she was in high school.
I really could have I could have definitely done better in high school. And when I graduated, Annie Peg again has been quite an influence in my life, and she and my parents got together there in Garrison, and well, should you go to college or not? And that'd be a waste of time, but 2-year colleges weren't much the thing then. I probably could have done well well, I did go to a trade school. So Dunwoody was a trade school for, well, they had mechanics, they had engineering, they had, all kinds of stuff, and baking.
So that's in
So I went to baking.
In Minneapolis?
Yeah, that was in Minneapolis. So I was there for, just a winter.
Yeah, and that's kind of transitioning into our next spot. But I just a couple things to kind of wrap up this, talking about your childhood until, when you're done with high school and such. I had just a couple of random things that were questions people had. Did you have a nickname when you were in school? I seem to remember there was one.
Not that I can put on that.
I seem to recall, weren't you, didn't you earn the name Wild Bill at some point?
Yeah, I was called Wild Bill some, mostly later.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was later.
But in high school, I was Bill usually, sometimes Willie. That was about it. Again, moving so much, it was just about the time that you got to know each other, and then off I went.
Yeah. I just vaguely remembered that, and I was looking through questions that might be interesting, and I'm sure there's a story that we can cover back then. We also had on here somebody was wanting, did you have any role models growing up?
You'd asked me that, and that's rolled around in my mind since I read this paper, and well, it was probably my parents and my mother and all her fortitude, political figures, possibly Eisenhower being a good Republican, but I still, Truman was all right. He just was from the wrong side of the fence, that was probably it.
Yeah, so that just and kind of just I'm kind of a lot of what I do is history. Do you have any memories from World War II or anything? You were pretty young at that point, but
No, I do. World War II again started just after I was adopted. The first.
yeah.
I've told you this, but if you want to record this for history, the day I was born, November 9th, 1939, was the day that the Nazis went into the ghettos in Poland and started rounding up the Jews. That day. So that's when things started to fall apart. And of course, Pearl Harbor came along and we got involved. But, yes, I do remember, because my parents would, in the morning, would turn on the radio and listen to the news reports from France or Germany or Japan or wherever it was. I remember those. I can't remember them specifically, but you could hear that noise, and it was all that scratchy, crackly stuff, and yeah, I remember that. From the war, oddly enough, your mother and Joan remember when the war ended, and then they celebrated and ran around pots and pans and stuff. I don't remember that. That we did any. I think we were just terribly relieved that the doggone thing was over with. I do remember it was Korea, but I was in the band in Princeton, and it was cold. It was November, December, or spring, late winter. And the band, I played clarinet, and I played a metal clarinet.
Ooh.
And the band, and I got a wood one later, but at that time I played it, and we got in our uniforms with our little feather top caps, and we marched the recruits, the soldiers that were there in Princeton, to the train depot, and the band led them down we had a parade through downtown and out to the depot. And I remember marching that, and as cold as it was so cold.
Yeah. I think what else we had here. Probably like a wrap-up question. Did you have any particular favorite childhood memory or memories that really stuck out to you, like one of your happiest or favorite things from your childhood?
Hey, favorite, where do you class up on my childhood? I remember, I'm not sure it's favorite, but I do remember that when the second polio hit, there was another polio epidemic in the late 40s, I think 1948. And of course, we lived in a quarter block, like I said, and on two sides on the street sides of the property, we had an 8-foot high hedge, laurel hedge, and you couldn't see through it. And that was summer, no school, and I could not leave the property because my mother had polio and I was quarantined. And that wasn't even a catchphrase. My friends could come in, but I couldn't go anywhere. And we had friends that had a cabin on Lake Osakis, which is north of Princeton, 60 miles about. And we would go every summer to their cabin. They had a cabin up there. And so we would go up there, and I'm just learning how to swim and so on. So we'd go up there and wade in the water and go swimming and play around up there at the cabin for, several days, part of our vacation. Later, when I lived in Oregon, we were friends with a scoutmaster, and he would rent a rental cabin, house, right on the seashore, right on the Pacific Ocean. And we would go there for a few days, and his son was friends of mine, Roger Sanford. I wonder if he's still alive. But anyway, we would go out there. I'd go hiking in the woods outside of Long Prairie and catch snakes and bring them back and put them in the school. And
A lot of animal pranks.
some memories I don't need to share with the upcoming generations, because they might get an idea.